over decades in education. But let's still focus on this issue. The most startling, I think, point in the Anacada agenda was the underspending, public spending per student in the Philippines vis-a-vis our neighbors in the ASEAN region. We all know that the education budget has increased under this administration, but it's still not enough compared to our neighbors. In your own assessment, what kind of progress has been done in this direction, if any? And of course, is the money, are the funds going where they matter most?
Well, David, I think we're making good progress in that area. My budget when I was in education was something like 100 billion. It's now closer to 400 billion. But you know, unfortunately, there are very few areas in education that are open to a quick fix. Bobby De Ocampo was complaining about a policy initiative that took 12 years to complete. How about K-12? It took over 80 years to get that implemented. So even in the case of the budget, even in the case of school building construction, for instance, where you can throw money at the problem, that doesn't solve the situation, that doesn't address the problems of education if you construct buildings without taking a look at whether you will have enough teachers to staff them. So there is a balancing that always needs to be required. Secondly, I think the government bit off quite a major problem when it decided very bravely to launch K-12. I think so? They have to stay the course because this is not an easy project to complete. And the other thing that I'll mention is that once you take a radical step like that, the tendency is that you create in the process bigger challenges. For instance, right now, as we begin to implement K-12, and we're not really implementing until 12-15 or 12-16, which means that our graduates will not be K-12 compliant until 6 years later, the tertiary sector, higher education, is now agonizing over the shortfall in revenue that will hit them in the 5-year transition period. So that will also need to be addressed.
But let's talk about the backlog in schoolhouses, in infrastructure in education. And apart from that, of course, the teachers needed to fill those schoolhouses. Those two aspects are very important. Your assessment on the progress and the priority this government needs to provide in this direction.
As I said, I think we're on the right track there. More important to me are the policy issues that the government is facing. Yeah. And that, I understand that the President has said the K-12 should be implemented in 12-15 rather than 12-16, which is good because it's, to me, a little risky to leave the implementation of the K-12 at a point when you're giving up power already because you don't know what's going to happen. And you don't really get to see the problems of the new system until you see the implementation on the ground. It is then when you can make the corrections and the adjustments that are required. But if we implement as the administration is leaving the halls of power, you don't have any control anymore about the kind of adjustments that will be needed to be made.
Now, one of the adjustments that needs to be addressed, of course, would be the quality of education. It's not enough to just extend the number of years, but to improve the quality. And just briefly, let's talk about that. I mean, the quality, the training for teachers, and of course, the orientation of educational system.
Okay, when we began a major push for K-12, the issue that we were concerned about mainly was the inclusive growth. I felt we needed a safety net for the kids who would be dropping out of a 10-year system without the basic skills that would equip them to compete in the labor market. So very important for me, for the people working then, was the VocTech track in education, in the senior high school program. And that will need to be monitored very closely. As far as the academic track is concerned, we felt that what was needed was more time on task. Because what was happening was that the skills, the knowledge, that the tools that the high school students were supposed to have learned in high school were being pushed up to first and second year college. So some flexibility is needed with K-12 so that, in fact, you give the students more time to address the tool courses that in English, in math and science that are required for those who are pursuing an academic track.
Thank you so much. You might have your own questions about the educational sector in the country. We are, of course, continuing to flash the text for your questions. Hopefully, I'll get those texts, not on my phone, but through some written questions care of the staff today. It's a very large topic we're discussing here: education, governance, and of course, the judiciary. So let me just quickly move to governance for a while, and hopefully there's time we can go back to education. A lot of things still have to be discussed in that sector. But governance, of course, is the key policy that this administration has run on. This is for both of you, actually. No? And President ran on that platform of anti-corruption, won on that platform. 4 years later, we want to see how much progress, real progress, has been made in terms of the anti-corruption effort, at least the most significant aspects of it. Ma'am, you first.
You're talking, of course, I'm covering the judiciary, and actually,
But these are so intertwined.
Yes,
it needs to be discussed at the same time.
So I'm just focusing on relative to your question, what has been done relative to the judiciary. Actually, I'd like to start with what I think is the most important that has been done when it comes to tone at the top, which we cannot, of course, underestimate. Over the past 20 years, for instance, the Supreme Court has not been even disclosing its statement of assets, liabilities, and net worth, and all of that. But what we've noticed is actually since 2011, they've been disclosing that. They've been disclosing even their use of the Judicial Development Fund. They have actually been also disclosing that their funds have been audited by COA. So these are governance initiatives at the top. Relative to anti-corruption, they've also done that by way of creating investigative panels where they are due. But most importantly, relative to what has been done, I think what we really have to give the Supreme Court credit for is the judicial efficiency. I think some of you have that in your packets. You know that delays in the justice system also results in injustice. And what they've actually been done is based on the research of Arrancada, is that the vacancy rates in the courts have come down. There have been a decline in the caseload for judges, as well as in the overall drop in the overall case backlogs and increase in the resolution of new cases. I think here the increase has been quite significant at close to 50%. So in terms of all of that, in terms of governance, in terms of setting the tone at the top, in terms of looking at some of the anti-corruption measures as well, of course, we still hear these cases, these allegations about Arlene Lerma and the like. I think I'm going to cover that and what can be done. But I think it is there where more transparency, where they've started that tone, should be carried over. Because this is where we want to see that there is an open and transparent investigative system within the courts.
Let's ask the former ombudsman what he thinks about the anti-corruption record so far of this administration. Clearly, there are many high-profile investigative bodies, high-profile prosecution panels that have been formed. But significantly, in real terms, how much progress has this country made beyond the feel-good atmosphere that some seem to talk about?
Well, you have to put it in perspective. The real body that has the duty to prosecute rapid corruption cases is the Ombudsman. And the predecessor of our present Ombudsman is a -8 trust rating. So, well, the situation is really grave. She has emasculated the office of the Ombudsman, removed all the reforms that were introduced previously You can see that there was a study made by the UNDP. But the first thing that the president made was to appoint somebody whose integrity and competence is unquestioned. And you know, this is the first time that somebody who is not known or not close to the president that was appointed as ombudsman. Justice Vasquez was close to, known to President Aquino, Cory Aquino. Same thing with Ani. Same thing with me. I was the private counsel of, before I joined government, of GMA. But this is the first time that somebody who was unknown to the president was appointed as ombudsman. That's really a real signal that he is really serious about anti-corruption. Secondly, recently also, the second highest official in the office of the ombudsman, the overall deputy ombudsman, there was a vacancy and appointed to replace the one who retired is Arthur Carandang. Unlike Justice Morales, who's already in her 70s, a retired justice of the Supreme Court, Art is young enough to be open to out-of-the-box solutions to corruption. But more importantly, Art came out from the ranks, rose up from the ranks. She has the experience. She has a master's and had sufficient training. Used to be the head of the FIO. So that's really the main, appointing first the right people. The only missing fundamental piece now is the head of the prosecution department, the special prosecutor. They have to appoint, President has to appoint somebody to replace Sulit, somebody who's competent, so somebody who's also morally upright. So all these changes that has been made introduced by Justice Morales have been slowly, it has even up. It has really not yet solved, but at least mitigated the extreme damage that Gutierrez has made on the office of the Ombudsman. So all they have to do now is, but there's one advantage that Justice Morales had that I never had. I had only an operating budget of 350 million. The Ombudsman now has 1.2 billion. So it can now recruit, after solving all these problems created by Gutierrez, who harassed all the good ones, the good people in the office of the Ombudsman into resigning or retirement or transferring. So she has now to recruit people to replace them. She has the budget, although we have to get an exemption from the SAL law, because how can you recruit good people if you cannot give them good salaries? But that's very simple. You have to have, in order to be able to solve the problem of corruption, like in the judiciary, you have to have a lot of investigators. In Hong Kong, the ratio is 1 investigator for every 800, more or less, government officials and employees. Here, when they came to the office of the Ombudsman, there are only 37 investigators for a 1.5 million bureaucracy. Now we have, I think they have about 150 investigators. How can you solve the problem? And then you have to have prosecutors. You need 200 good prosecutors. They now have only 76. And if you talk to the justices, they cannot even name up to 10 prosecutors who are not only competent but morally upright. The second thing is, assuming that all these problems of ombudsman are solved, there's one major problem that the legislature has totally ignored. I've been advocating this ever since I was the ombudsman, which is doubling the number of the justices, the Sandigan Bayan. Just have to put more boots on the ground. How can they, right now, before when I was ombudsman, the World Bank made a study on the cause of on the delay in the Sandigan Bayan. At that time, the finding was that on the average, it took 6.6 years to finish a case from the time an information is filed up to the time a decision has been rendered. Now, based on our study of 2011 and 2012 cases which were resolved by the Sandigan Bayan, it now takes 10 years to finish a case. So those are the things that you have to do. We have really to push it. And unfortunately, it's very, very difficult now to push this amendment of the Sandigan Bayan. You know why? Because there are a lot of people in the legislature who are involved in the PDAP cases. So I'm sure this amendment will meet not only before steep opposition, but extremely steep opposition in the legislature.
You
Thank
just read my mind, Attorney. Having said that, the challenges the Office of the Ombudsman faces, What are the prospects now for properly investigating and prosecuting those who are linked to the pork barrel scam? This is an opportunity, I think we all agree, for the country to, in a big, not just symbolic way, but in a real way, strike at the heart of corruption in some of the highest places.
Well, right now, we can, as far as the ombudsman is concerned, they will, in order to beef up the ranks of the investigator, they are also adopting what I've done before, to recruit fresh graduates because they'll be idealistic, there are no financial constraints, and just give them intensive training. During my time, we have the trainers from FBI, from Homeland Security, from the IRS, and then locally, we have the guys from ISAP, from PIDEA, who train them on the task of their duty of investigation. So I think that will be solved eventually. Regarding the prosecutors, I think they can recruit now, but on the long term, we have to give them, we have to give the Office of the Ombudsman an exemption to the salary standardization law so that they can keep these prosecutors. No, what happens is that if they're good enough already after staying for 5 years, you know how much they get for an increase if they're promoted to the next rank? 60,000 annually. That's what you get. I mean, the starting salary is okay, but after 5 years, if you're promoted to the next rank, you get only a miserly 60,000. That has to be solved in the long term. And also, Joker Arroyo in 2001 already filed this bill, which is a short-term solution to the lack of prosecutors at the Office of the Ombudsman. Again, you know, because maybe our legislators are afraid. This bill has never even passed the committee level, just like the proposed bill to increase the number of Sandigan Bayan justices. And the bill of Senator Joker Arroyo, which is now the bill is being sponsored by Senator Trillanes, is deputizing private lawyers, no, to become prosecutors at the Sandigan Bayan. That's not allowed. Under the law, the Office of the Ombudsman can only deputize government prosecutors, government lawyers. But we don't have even enough at the DOJ. How can we deputize them? No?
Attorney,
So
yes.
that's really the thing to do. There are two things. One, increase the number of justices so that they can have mandatory continuous trial. Second, give the ombudsman the authority to deputize private lawyers.
I'd like to get Ms. Nueza's reaction as well, but let me just put you both on the spot because the business community is really watching this pork barrel scam very closely, and where it goes will determine just how serious not just this government is, but how serious our body politic is about cleansing itself. Let me put you on the spot. Where is this going?
As they say, the test of the pudding is in the eating. If the president able to put these two legislative propositions, the Trillanes and the one is the bill to increase the number of justices. Just okay. So every bill is filed now. The bill filed in 2010. You go na gun until level. So it is the president's attention. The president is without the is over. It is but this side to finish the presentation of evidence in the case in 18 months. Those are 40 so about 4.5 months of presentation of evidence. Look at cases and Bayan. The Sarangani case, which a precursor of the PIDA cases, also cooperatives, dami NGOs, forging the signatures of the chairman, presidents of the bona fide NGOs. The first case that I filed took 8 years. The second one, 10 years. And the third one, which was recently on the newspaper because of the PDAP scandal, took 11 years to finish. And these are simple cases. So I have said that putting more boots on the ground, unless you have, unless you deputize private prosecutors, just like in the impeachment of former President Estrada and the former Chief Justice, and unless you increase the number of justices and you can have continuous trial, just in the Estrada case, it was mandated by the Supreme Court that there will be continuous trial. But what we did was, really the effect is that if nobody noticed because we prosecuted the president, but we never filed any case against his cronies. That's the bitter decision that we have to make, that we cannot prosecute others because we don't have the resources to do it.
All the more the fear that time is running out. Sharissa, you'd like to add to how we can add more, I guess, muscle to the bodies that are in charge of actually investigating and prosecuting these cases?
Well, I agree with what Attorney Marcelo is saying, that we have to put focus, we have to make sure that they have the right resources. But specific to the judiciary, I also want to recommend that within the judiciary, there should be really an open, transparent, and independent system of investigating cases against erring judges and court personnel. Like what's happening in PDAF, you see a lot of, I guess, publicity, what's coming out. I think there is, of course, a certain barrier that the court, specifically the Supreme Court, has to have in order to have independence. But we have to lift this veil of mystery when it comes to investigating judges. All I'm saying is we also have a similar PDAF-like cases, like this Arlene Lerma case and probably similar cases, not to prejudge anything. And you have to give the Supreme Court credit for actually asking the help of DOJ and the NBI in investigating. So there's some independence there. But there has to be a swift resolution. They have to publicize more what's happening in the case of a judge being accused of bribery. Because, former Chief Justice Reynato Puno himself said that, well, in the dispensation of justice, the highest official down to the lowest clerk must be held in the highest or strictest standards of integrity and honesty, because dishonesty is a malevolent act that has no place in the judiciary. Therefore, that should be the first one. How do you investigate? And as, in fact, maybe Attorney Marcelo can give us an idea. Are you able to investigate more complaints against judges now? Because currently, all administrative complaints, of course, or that judicial discipline starts with the Office of the Court Administrator, which is also within the Supreme Court. Not that they're not doing anything or that it is a wrong system, but all we're saying is it has to be more independent, it has to be more transparent.
Of course, we all want to see where the Freedom of Information Bill will go, because all these issues will also be addressed by the transparency that would come out of this. Before we wrap this up,
David,
yes,
may I
Doctor,
address
please.
that question? Because I think that the acid test in the area of both governance and the judicial system really rests on two cases. No? The PDAF case and the Ampatuan massacre. And it's noteworthy that in the last SWS survey for 2013, the lowest score of the administration was really on the handling of the Ampatuan case. So definitely more hands on deck will be important. But I think that there is also a need to work towards rationalizing the system. I think it is salutary that education is being discussed in the context of governance and the judicial system because they are related. Educational formation is by its nature a long-term task, but the delay is sometimes unnecessarily extended because of governance and judicial issues. For instance, it's kind of ridiculous that a labor case should go all the way up to the Supreme Court. I mean, and we have educational institutions that are facing this problem. So there is an important area in both governance and the judicial system for this coalition building so that we can address the bottlenecks.
Clearly, too much to discuss in just 20 minutes. But lest we be accused of not accepting and reading your questions, this one came from one of the text messages. And how do you assess this CJ Sereno's performance in terms of at least championing judicial reforms? Shariza. Then I'd like to open the floor for very few questions before we move on to the next part of our program.
Okay, let me answer this briefly because I did cite already some of the statistics that shows they scored well in the areas of better focused on administrative and judicial efficiency, and also in setting the tone at the top. But I guess it is where, in the area of all of these allegations and perceptions of corruption in the judiciary, that the Supreme Court really has to focus more. And thank God they have more than 2 years. So I think this is where we are just asking that perhaps, if I may suggest, there should be a whistleblower policy and a whistleblower mechanism and system within the Supreme Court and even the Department of Justice and perhaps the Ombudsman, so that we can really get more people engaged in the process. Because as we said, it's really in corruption, which has a very close link to both poverty and the need for, inclusivity in all our economic agenda.
Well, you'll find most of these proposals, in fact, in the Arrancada agenda. And it's good to see the kind of connect that's taking place between our speakers and, of course, the authors of the Arrancada paper. Attorney Marcelo, very quickly, you wanted to say something before we close this forum.
The question of Sherry was not, I had to reply to it. The real thing, the real act to be done, really, Sherry, is to have a lot of investigators investigating the judges. But you should start with the JBC, which we have done before in the Office of the Ombudsman. You should have a unit of very good and competent and honest investigators who will investigate the background of those applying for judicial positions. That has never been done. They just go through the formality of investigating but never really doing it. Okay? They have to do that. They start from the beginning. Because there are rumors who are corrupt judges, then you see them becoming appellate justices, even becoming SC justices. And then, as you said, there should be a reversal of the ruling rendered during the time of Chief Justice Narbasa. That is, the investigation of members of the judiciary should be done first by the judiciary, by the Office of the Court Administrator. And it led to an old boys network where they are protected only the very, very, how do you call it, clear cases of corruption where, there was an entrapment like we did before, where a judge was asking for a bribe. We could talk to the NBI. That's when they did not intervene, when we immediately file a case in the Sandigan Bayan. But all other cases, the Supreme Court has to decide first whether he is administratively liable. And if it's not administratively liable, then we cannot even investigate him. Because if he is not administratively liable, that means there's no substantial evidence. And for us to be able to file a case, there should be probable cause, which is a higher degree of evidence that's needed. I would like to mention about the Ampatuan case. The Ampatuan case, the problem is the inability to think out of the box. Now, but eventually, the Supreme Court has come to that thinking out of the box. Now we have 3 judges conducting trial, deciding the case. Because what should be done? Which we have done with the Sangarangani case. There were 50 counts. We only filed 5 pairs of cases. So there are 5 cases, all parallel trial. The same thing should have happened with the Ampatuan case. Those who have participated directly in the commission of the crime, except maybe 4 or 5, should be charged in different courts. The same in Quezon City. If there are 200 of them, maybe you can assign all those cases, 5 in every